Okay, we're going to look at a couple more things for a couple more displays that we can do with our data. And so for one of these, we're going to need what's called a class midpoint, okay? And the way that we find our class midpoint is going to be that you take the lower class for the group that you're in, and you're going to add the next lower class, and you're going to divide by 2. What this is going to do is it's going to put the midpoint kind of right in the middle of the class that you are in, okay? So we're going to take a look at this number 13 on our examples, okay? And I'm just getting this set up to do. And we're going to talk about how this is done. And then we're going to look at a couple of displays where we will, one display where we'll use this, and then we'll have one other one that we'll need to talk about to finish up this section. Okay. So the way that we're going to do this, okay, is, so here is our data set, okay? And this is, they're talking about the number of murders per 100,000 people that they have. So the way that we calculate this, okay, is we're going to take, move this down just a bit here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the midpoint or the lower limit that we have, so in this case 0. We're going to add the next lower limit, and we're going to divide by 2. So that's going to be 2.5. Okay, and I'm going to show you when I do this next one, 5 plus 10 divided by 2, that's going to be 15. And that is going to be 7.5. Now, one of the things that I want you, that we've talked about here is that the class width, we've got 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. Those all have a class width of 5. We also see 4.9 to 9.9 is a width of 5. 9.9 to 14.9 is a width of 5. Here, 2.5 to 7.5 is a width of 5. So you can then kind of, once you've established and you know how that's going to work, and you know that all of your classes follow the same pattern, or they do have the same class width, you can kind of process through these fairly quickly because they all follow, and I'm just adding 5 every time because that is my class width when we do this. Okay, so we've got, that's how we've got our class midpoints, okay? We've got all the way down through our lovely list. Okay. So now, and this one was a slightly different one. This was, they were doing a the particular emissions. This one has a class width of 1, and then we would have, if we did 0 plus 1, that would be 1 divided by 2. So we'd have 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5 as our midpoints for this particular one. Now, the next thing, though, that we're going to talk about here is what's called a frequency polygon. Okay, and this is just another graph type. Okay, and this one uses our midpoints particularly for this one. And so I'm going to again work with that same data that we had on the murders. Sounds like a wonderful thing for us to discuss. So we're going to take a look at this and use the midpoint. And then this is basically a line graph, okay? So I'm going to pull us back over here, okay? So I now have our frequencies. I've got kind of our midpoints covered up here for a second. And so I've got 2.5 and 22 and 7.5 and 23 and 12.5 and 13, 17, and so on and so forth. And I'm now going to put this onto a grid space, okay? So I'm going to, excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm going to turn my board over. I'm not going to use the grid that it has here. I'm just going to use a straight axis boarding here, okay? And I'm gonna go 5, 15, 20, 25, and then I'm gonna do 2.5, 7.5, 12.5, 17.5, 22.5. So I'm just going to get us started down here on the bottom. So I'm at 2.5 and 22. It's going to be here. I'm at 7.23. So that's going to be here. I'm at 12.5 and 13. Here. So I'll start my connections. Okay. And then I'm at, the next one is at 6. And then I'm at 3. So here. Then I'll go down to 0 at 27.5. Then we have 2. And I'm at 32.5, 37.5, 42.5, 47.5, 2.5, 2. I come down to 1. I come down to 0, 0, and then 1. Okay, so this is what our frequency polygon would look like for that particular data set that we had that was in the example problem. Okay. So here's a slightly different one that they were doing with that particulate matter one. Okay. Now, the other thing that we have to discuss is what's called a cumulative frequency. Okay. So I'm going to flip my loveliness back over. Okay. Okay. And with a cumulative frequency, what we're doing is you add that category and all the ones previous. So for example, with this first one, we've got 9. So we just have 9 at that point. For this 1 to 9, we then add the 9 and the 26 to get the 35. And then we're going to add on the 11 to get 46 and then add on. Now, what should happen is that this very last category should have everything in it. Okay. So now when we look at here, okay, this first category, so if we're going to look at cumulative frequency out here, okay, the first one is just 22. Then we've got 22 and 23, which makes 45. And then we're going to add 13, which is going to be 58. We're going to add 6, which is 64. Add 3, which is 67. Add 0, so we're still at 67. Add 2, we're at 69. Add 1, we're at 70. Still at 70. Still at 70. And finally, we end at 71. Okay. Now, the thing to notice here is that on this cumulative frequency, your value should either increase or stay the same. You should never have a cumulative frequency that drops. Okay. This should always be moving upwards as we're processing through. Okay. So now, once we've talked about cumulative frequency, there is a type of graph called an ogive. Okay. And this ogive uses our cumulative frequencies, okay, in order to show kind of how the graphing is. Now, this is helpful to see where large increases happen as we're going through. And I'm going to go over, I'm just going to get this one started. Now, the other thing is with this one, and I don't have my graph quite going all the way up, you are going to be using the upper limit for this, okay? So in our case, I would use 4.9 for that first spot, and then 9.9, 14.9, 19.9, 24.9, 29.9. Okay, so we said that first one was at 22. Okay, so there's my first thought. Then we went to 45. Here, and again, this is another connection with line graph. Then we went to 58. Okay, so I'm fixing to run out of space on my graph. Then we went to 61. Just over. Excuse me, we went to 64. Okay. Okay, so notice that the graph goes up. Now, what's going to happen with this? And I'm going to bring my actual example over, my keyed one over. Okay. You can see that we've got this upward trending. There is one spot right here where we flatline, and there's another one over here where we flatline. But this line graph should be always increasing, moving upwards, or flatlining. You should never have any dips in an ogive when we're doing that type of a graph.